But when I came to South Africa, for the first time in my life, this is a history. Most, if not all, African countries made it very clear that their officials will not come to South Africa. In fact, in my passport, it says, visit all foreign countries with the exception of South Africa. And that was the case. That was the case of many African countries. So the first time I came to South Africa is in 1993, when I led, and this was the time when the country was preparing for democratic elections. I led an OU delegation, and that was the first time the OU visited South Africa, by the way, comprising of different senior officials of various nationalities. And we, both for me and all my African colleagues, the visit was extremely emotional when we landed in Johannesburg. Because quite frankly, even though we were all confident that one time South Africa will be free, will be liberated, none of us had that high expectation that the freedom would come at the time it came. So it was really an overwhelming emotion for all of us. During that occasion, I was privileged to meet with the leadership of South Africa at that time. I met with Madiba at Umtata, met with President de Klerk in Cape Town, Prince Buthelezi in Urundi, KwaZulu-Natal, the President of the Pan-Africanist Congress, Mr. Makwetu, in Johannesburg, and leaders of the Freedom Front, including General Viljoen, then former Chief of the Armed Forces. And going to meet the Freedom Front, many people were saying, why are you going to meet the Freedom Front? I said, it's important to meet them. And I said to General Viljoen, I remember, I said, General, we haven't met physically, but we have met in Angola. I think he knew what I meant, so there was no discussion. So those are thinking that the reflections I had, and I thought, well, I must share them with you, because they are very personal, nothing official. It's simply how I felt during that period. Now, if I've decided to recite these experiences, it's only to tell you that I, like many other African colleagues, felt very close to the struggle against apartheid and considered it as our own struggle. It was an African struggle. And it doesn't matter, the contribution of Africans may have varied from one country to another, but I can tell you, one of the things which is extremely important, every single African identified himself or herself with the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. I should have come with the laptop, maybe. Well, it is therefore important that I make an early conclusion in my submission that as we focus on our continent's future in a manner that effectively meets the massive challenges and exploit the vast opportunity that exists in Africa's development and prosperous future, at the very least, these leadership attributes need to be internalized and creatively applied in shaping Africa's current future cadre of leadership. I refer here to the attributes which are shown by the founding fathers and also by people like Thabo Mbeki. It is tragic that precisely because of its profound commitment to the continent's meaningful emancipation, the freedom generation of African leadership was effectively undermined during the first decade of Africa's independence. This was the height of the Cold War tensions as competing powers sought to extend their respective sphere of influence on the continent. Africa's promise and hope for a meaningful uhuru disappeared fast, and post-independence Africa became characterized by wars, instabilities, and undemocratic regimes, thereby losing that transformative and developmental vision that has characterized and energized nationalist and Pan-Africanist struggles of our forebears. Yet all was not lost, particularly in the Southern African region, where the strong leadership of the frontline states and the liberation movements sustained the vanguard of the African revolution within the region and within the continent, as well as through the non-alignment movement and the international community at large. In this context, it is in this context one of the early Pan-Africanist acts by President Mandela's administration, after coming to power in 1994, was to resuscitate the cause for Africa's rebirth or renaissance, in which you, Mr. President Mbeki, have been and continue to be actively involved. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to chart the path forward, we must be frank in our assessments of Africa's since the era of collective independence. Now we are free. It's indeed pertinent to ask ourselves whether the aims and objectives articulated by the pioneers of our independence movement have been achieved, or for that matter, anywhere near fulfillment. I'm afraid at a certain juncture of the past few decades, we seem to have lost the compass with all its attendant implications. It is indeed a fact that though our countries are free, the aims and objectives of the freedom struggle has yet to be attained in many of our countries. When we fought for freedom, we did not just fight for the purpose of replacing the white colonialism. The objective was to improve the lot of our people. It was intended to ensure larger freedoms, including the right to decide on how we are governed, by whom, and for what period. It was to remove injustice and ensure that the country's resources are utilized for the betterment of our people. It was to fight disease, ignorance, and abject poverty, to change the lives of our people and to transform the continent from what it used to be called the Dark Continent to the continent which is living up to its responsibilities. As we therefore mark the 51 years since the laying the foundation of African unity and reflect and plan for the future, there are some soul-searching questions which we as Africans need to ask ourselves. Why is it a continent which is one of the richest, if not the richest, in terms of resources, both human and material, continues to have the poorest people? How can we rationally explain the continued and in some cases escalating internal conflicts in some parts of our continent with attendant losses of millions of lives, human misery and destruction, as well as forcing millions of our people to vote with their feet? How do we erase the image of a continent where corruption is considered endemic? How do we sustain and better utilize the current decade-old achievements of economic growth into a shared prosperity for all? Indeed, some of our leaders in Africa, including you, President Mbeki, have characterized the 21st century as Africa's century. I believe that this is possible, desirable, achievable, and most of all, necessary. This should be the clarion of the new generation of young people who, unlike in our times, has more privileges of global interconnectivity, including advanced communication technology, to use for fulfilling its generational mission. But we must move with seriousness and deliberate speed in addressing all those problems which are within our means to resolve. These include: to improve governance. Indeed, this is the #1 issue All those who lead at whatever level, but especially at national leaders, must be held accountable and act in a manner which makes them truly servants of the people who have elected them to power. It is significant to observe that in this context, that practical experience has already demonstrated that where there is a responsible, accountable, and incorruptible leadership abiding by the principles of good governance, their countries have made enormous progress in socio-economic development. Good governance, democracy, accountability, and transparency should be nurtured and sustained, and above all, be made an essential component of our societies. Africa, which has suffered a lot of indignities and inhumanity due to massive violations of our people's rights, should be in the forefront for the protection and respect of human rights. To achieve this, it is imperative to build democratic institutions, improve our educational system, and strengthen our civil societies. It is also in this context that one has to take note of the declaration issued by the OAU heads of states and government in February 1990, following the end of the Cold War, on the political and socio-economic situation in Africa and the fundamental changes taking place in the world. In essence, the declaration underscored Africa's commitment to democracy, human rights, rule of law, good governance as fundamental prerequisites for sustainable socio-economic development on the continent. The establishment of the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, by the OAU heads of states and government in July 2001 in Lusaka, Zambia, was meant to provide an overarching vision and policy framework for accelerating economic cooperation and integration among African countries. This measure was to be further strengthened by the establishment of the African Peer Review Mechanism in 2003 by the African Union, which focuses on the importance of good governance in pursuing the new African dream for its alliances. We must strive to uplift the lot of our people. Economic and social transformation is a prerequisite condition. In this context, a number of factors need to be taken into account. In recent years, Africa has had strong economic growth records, largely attributed to the comparative advantage that we have on natural resources and the demands fueled by the strong growth in the largest emerging economies in Latin America and Asia. However, this growth has not translated into further reduction of poverty, nor income and wealth inequality as we expected. We must guard against the growing inequities in our societies, which cause resentment and despair among our people, and especially the millions of unemployed young people. If we fail to redress this imbalance, we run the risk of implosion and conflict. We must gradually but firmly eliminate the contradiction of a very rich continent inhabited by the poorest people. Africa has a strong comparative advantage in natural resources that for many years has turned out to be more of a curse than a blessing. With major discovery of oil and gas reserves in several African countries joining the traditional oil-producing countries, Africa should heed the lessons of the last oil boom that saw being squandered by both local and multinational greed. We cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of yesterday. Africa's immense natural resources must be mobilized properly, and properly used for its development. After years of structural economic transformation that focus on economic growth, it is crucial to note the necessity of adopting inclusive socio-economic development for our continent to survive the challenges and development and ensure the opportunities of sustainable development. The necessity of ensuring that wealth and resources of Africa are used to benefit all people and not just channeled towards the gains of a few cannot be overstated. Inclusive socio-economic development, ensuring that all individuals can meet the basic needs of their families, that all of the continent's diverse social, political, and economic groups feel equally part of their societies, and that all individuals who strive for a better tomorrow can be given equitable opportunities to improve their livelihood, constituted the vision of our founding fathers. and must constitute the guiding light of our current and future generations of leaders. Without such inclusive development, our societies will remain plagued by political marginalization and socioeconomic inequalities, and it is these conditions that inflame violence and ultimately threaten our collective peace, security, and development. This move towards inclusive economy must go hand in hand with the efforts of uplifting the status and appreciate the role of our women in economic and political leadership. The women of Africa have been the most resilient and dynamic force. They constitute more than 50% of the entire population. They have played a crucial role in the struggle for independence and liberation wars. In conflict situations, they bear a disproportionate burden of suffering. They have played and continue to play a pivotal role in all facets of economic and social development. But in most of our countries, I repeat, in most of our countries, their full potential has yet to be utilized. And their role in decision-making continues to be, by and large, sadly marginal. Currently, African countries are taking significant steps aimed at empowering women, and this is a step which must be encouraged. This vital process needs to be encouraged and intensified. This powerful force, when properly empowered and allowed to make full use of their potential, will unleash an irreversible movement toward the political, social, and economic emancipation of our continent. Of equal importance is the need to recognize the current demographic trend of the continent, where 60% of Africans are below the age of 40. With almost 200 million people aged between 15 and 24, Africa has the youngest population in the world. Between 2000 and 2008, Africa's working age population grew from 443 million to 550 million, an increase of 25%. In annual terms, this is the growth of 13 million or 2.7% per year. If this trend continues, the continent's labor force will be 1 billion strong by the year 2040, making it the largest in the world, surpassing both China and India. In this context, it is imperative to ensure that policies and actions which constitute the agenda of the future make effective use of this dynamic. Quite often, this is considered as a time bomb. But it is a time bomb if only we do not make use of it positively. Hence, we must invest in whatever way necessary to ensure we effectively nurture and utilize this comparative advantage we hold, not only to our greater success in the struggle for equitable prosperity, but also for our survival from potential conflicts. Similarly, fundamental advances in technology are radically changing how we organize our societies and engage one another. Advances in medical, industrial, and digital technologies are constantly pushing the boundaries on how we imagine the future. The achievements made in 3D printing and nanotechnology over the past 3 years has alone confidently assured me that our world will be radically different in 20 years or more. The internet and mobile phone have become great equalizers, creating an open space through which instantaneous communication and knowledge sharing can occur across massive territorial, social, and cultural divides. It is now an established fact that social media is crucially transforming how each individual perceives and engages what's around them. Nigerian-American author Teju Cole recently described the crux of the social media phenomenon in a lecture at Duke University's Kennan Institute of Ethics as follows. Each person is the command center of a new way of thinking about the world. We must collectively contend with the new and more diverse declarations of human equality and visibility. This then brings me to the imperative necessity of regional integration, an objective which has clearly been adumbrated by the then Organization of African Unity and now the African Union. But the pace of integration continues to be agonizingly slow, even though there are important efforts and achievements of the various sub-regional organizations. No single African country, however important or well-endowed, can have any serious impact on a world scale. The African collective cannot be ignored. In this context, we should learn from experiences of our European friends and partners. Many of these countries in Europe are strong politically, economically, scientifically, and militarily. They bear no comparison to individual African countries. Yet they have recognized their individual disadvantages and the merits of cooperation and integration in order inter alia to cope with the present and future challenges and opportunities facing them. In my view, for Africa, regional cooperation and integration is not a matter of choice, but survival. African leaders have taken a number of key decisions toward the realization of regional integration. Regrettably, however, there's a great hiatus between those decisions and actual implementation. One of the main challenges to this is how we take seriously the question of national and region-wide infrastructural development and maintenance. There's an urgent need to improve infrastructure and, among other things, gave practical meaning to the commitment to facilitate the free movement of goods and people. Apart from intra-regional infrastructural development and strengthening our regional economic schemes, we have a duty to bring the issues of United Africa to the people. While I'm optimistic that the United Africa dream will be realized in the coming years, it is discouraging to see how ineffectively we have performed in strengthening the Pan-African identity among our people and across borders. We are still lingering in an era of prejudices and stereotypes among us, keeping our peoples farther apart instead of moving us closer as people with shared history, challenges, opportunities, strength, identity, and destiny. We need to use both continental and intergovernmental and non-governmental institutions to project, promote, and nurture the vision of a united Africa for a new generation to effect within the coming years. In the coming years, Africa must continue efforts in dealing with the scourge of conflict, which has done so much damage to our people and societies. As a follow-up to the declaration issued by the OU heads of states and government in February 1990, following the end of the Cold War, on the political and socio-economic situation in Africa and the fundamental changes taking place in the world, it was felt that the existence of peace and stability on the continent was critical in pursuing the goals and objectives that Africa had set herself in 1990. The OU